Okay, we're starting part 2 with ironing our sets of strips. So I like to iron these open. So that's what you're gonna do for all of your sets. All right, step 2. So I've got these. I actually gonna cut 3 at a time. So I have all 3 sets for this one pair of blocks. And I'm gonna subcut these into 3-inch strips. I'm gonna show you how I just make this line my 0 line. And then we're cutting every 3 inches. So same thing you did before. And then you're gonna do this with your other set too. And of course you do not have to cut all 3 at once. That is just how I like to save some time. And then we're gonna sew these together. Okay, and then one more thing I forgot to mention. I always just cut as many strips as I can. I just cut off a tiny bit over here, and then I cut as many as I can with the fabric wise. And then I just make all the blocks that I can with those. And I always have 3 leftover blocks. So if you don't want leftover blocks, you can do some math there. But I actually love having leftover blocks, and I've been collecting them, and I'm gonna make a quilt out of those someday too. So you will get 3 left over if you just make as much as you can, which I think is kind of fun too. Next, we're simply gonna take all of our strips, and I'm gonna chain piece these. So I'll show you how I do that. I'm gonna get one here and one here. And to make the block, you'd have the 3rd one over here, you see? But I'm gonna set this one into a little separate pile. And I'm just gonna sew the first 2 together of all of them, and then I'll go back and do the 3rd of all of them. So I line up those points right there and get under my presser foot, sew all the way down. Okay, and then this is the chain piecing come in. I'm not gonna cut my thread. I'm just gonna give it a few more stitches, and then I'm gonna get the next one ready. Exact same thing. Under my presser foot, and just keep sewing. I'm gonna do that with all of them, and then I'll cut the thread at the very end and come back up to the top and add the 3rd. Okay, I just finished sewing the first 2 columns together, and then I'm gonna go all the way up to the top, open these up, and I'm gonna get the last little pile into that last strip on it to finish the block. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing. We're gonna line it up, and I'm gonna keep all the threads together. So all the way down, and keep that thread intact until you finish. Okay, I just finished sewing that 3rd row column on there, and now is when we want to go clip the threads. I have this little fancy schmancy hexy cutter thing, but you can just use scissors, you can use whatever. I like that you can kind of put both the threads into the slots like that. It's very satisfying. So just clip all your threads, and then we're gonna take it to the ironing board, and we're gonna do that same thing we did with our strips, and we're gonna press all the seams open. Okay, now we're just gonna press all of our seams open. I just use my fingers to spread that seam apart. Simply press the iron in there. And then I usually flip it over too and just give it a good press. And there's your finished block. So we're gonna finish ironing all of them, and then we're gonna do the exact same thing with your next set of blocks. Okay, now we have our 2 blocks here, and now we're simply gonna sew these into rows. You're gonna have 5 blocks in each row, and then you're gonna make 5 rows. So I'm going to, it doesn't really matter where you start with. Again, you're gonna have 3 blocks left over at the end of this. So I'm gonna start with this one, and then you're simply, I always kind of line up my horizontal seams. It really doesn't matter at all. But right sides together, little sandwich, line up this side, just the best of your ability. And we're just gonna sew all the way down. You could chain piece this like we did with the strips, but I don't. I don't know why. I make like each row a row at a time. So I'm gonna go ahead and sew 5 of these together. So just keep going. I've got all 5 blocks sewn into one row, and I'm gonna go ahead and iron this. I'm just gonna iron these seams open, and just like I did with all the other things. And then I'm gonna set it aside and make 4 other rows. Just make sure that since I started with this block for this row, you start with this block for the next row. So these are all of my pressed rows, and now I'm gonna work from left to right, sewing all the rows together. So take this guy and this one, same exact thing, right sides together, same which goes on top of each other. Line up your seams and sew all the way down, and sew all the rows together until you have your finished complete quilt top. Very last step is to just go press all those horizontal seams open. Okay, there is your finished quilt top. Yeah, in a quilt pattern, it would usually kind of end once you had the quilt top together. It would just say, baste your quilt, quilt your quilt, and bind your quilt. So technically our quilt pattern is over. Let me know in the comments here if you want me to show you how I baste, quilt, and bind. It'll be the same way you do it for every quilt, but if you're a beginner, it's sometimes helpful to see how other people do it. But yeah, so simple and beautiful. It's done.